Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Leader Talk. My name is SEAC retired John Wayne Troxell. Today I have a special guest to talk about a special subject that doesn't get a lot of attention unless something bad happens and all of a sudden the media jumps all over it. My guest today is a combat veteran. Spent 18 months working for Blackwater in Iraq from 2004 to 2005. Upon his return to the United States, he completed his undergraduate degree at Northern Arizona University and commissioned as a U.S. Army intelligence officer. From 2009 to 2010, he deployed back to Iraq. He is an author, has written 2 books, as well as articles that have been featured in Military Times, the Army Times, Air Force Times, Task and Purpose, and others. He's attended the prestigious Fletcher School at Tufts University, obtaining a Master's of International Business in International Banking and Finance. Most importantly, he lives in Phoenix, Arizona with his wife, his 2 children, and their dogs. Please welcome Morgan Lerette. Morgan, welcome to Leader Talk, brother.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention, Morgan is also an author of an awesome book called Guns, Girls, and Greed. I was a Blackwater mercenary in Iraq. So, Morgan, tell us a little bit about your military service and then what kind of motivated you to go on to want to be a private military contractor?
Yeah, absolutely. I was, the small town USA kid, all right? The recruiters lined up outside my door, licking their lips, trying to figure out which one was going to land me. Not because I was smart, but because, hey, I didn't have much else going on. So
Yeah.
I graduated high school in 99, and my grandfather was a World War II vet. He said, if you're going to go in the military, go in the Air Force. They have the best food. And that's all the thought I put into it. Like, I wish I could sit here and say I had this big grandiose plan, but
Yeah.
so I joined the Air National Guard and I was going to college and September 11th happened. Next thing you know, I'm activated for 2 years and I was young and single. So I went every place I could go. I went to Oman and then we deployed to Jordan and then to Kuwait and then to Iraq during the ground offensive. And when you get done with the National Guard, they just kind of like send you on your way. So what the heck was I going to do after that? My buddy that I was in the Guard with was a former Force Recon Marine. And he said, I'm going to go work for Blackwater. And I was like, you mean those guys that just got hanged off the bridge in Iraq? And he said, yeah, those guys. And I was like, have fun, man. So he ended up getting in and everything back then was word of mouth. He said, hey, call my buddy Morgan. He's good in the pocket. I literally got a phone call. The guy said, do you want to work for Blackwater? I said, not really. He said, well, what about for $550 a day? And I said, yeah, I do. So if you're asking about the motivation on why I went overseas to work for Blackwater, it was all money motivated.
Yeah.
As much as I want to sit here and say I was trying to do my patriotic duty, I felt like I had already done that. And now was my time to go try to cash in.
Yeah.
Uh,
And how long did you stay in the combat zone with Blackwater? I believe it was 18 months, right?
yeah, I did 18 months all over the place. So Baghdad North. So if you go Baghdad, Kirkuk, Sulaymaniyah, I did Al Hilla, so a little bit south. But anywhere, this is the same thing. I was young, I was single, and it was like, hey, we got a mission to fly over here. And it's like, put me in, coach.
And then you wrote a book on your experiences, Guns, Girls, and Greed. First of all, why the title? I mentioned to you before we went on air, this book is perfect for the E4 Mafia audience. They would love this because a lot of your language and how you talk in there and everything is right up the alley of our young troops and veterans. So why that title?
Well, those were the 3 topics of conversation, right? And anybody that's deployed or even sat around the motor pool bored out of their mind, what's the 3 things you talk about? You talk about your guns, you talk about your girls, maybe you just met Candy and you fell in love and you're getting married. You had that E4, I did too. Um,
Oh,
and
yes.
then and then it's about, when you have those types of people like me, grew up kind of young, poor, and now you're in a combat zone. We were making more money than we thought we'd ever make in our lives. So it was always those 3 topics of conversation during downtime.
And did your time over there, having spent time in combat as a uniformed service member, what was the key difference there, being now in a combat zone as a PMC as opposed to being in a combat zone as somebody in uniform? What were the key differences there?
Oh, big boy rules all day long. It was, you know, anybody that spent time overseas, you're waiting to go on a convoy. You get there 3 hours early, so somebody can check in you 2 hours early. One like you're just sitting around. Whereas with Blackwater, we said we're going to roll at noon, and it didn't matter if you got there at 11:59 or 11:48. You just needed to make sure that you were there, you were ready to go. Nobody was going to make sure you had water or you had your ammo or any of the other stuff that you do. So it was a complete 180 from that. It's just big boy rules, and then once you're done for the day, you're just done for the day. There's no formations or talking about what's going to happen tomorrow. You just kind of figure it out as you go.
Yeah, and you had a lot of funny pseudonyms for people that you worked with there. One was Grandpa, who seemed to kind of be the standards and discipline guy that, as you just described, really didn't apply. And the other one was, let me get his name right, Funk Faker. So how did you deal with those guys that were trying to bring a mindset in there that really wasn't, dare I say, compatible with what you were doing as a private military contractor?
Well, you do what you do in the schoolyard. You bully them,
Yeah.
which I hate to say it now. Grandpa is funny enough turned 45 when he was over there. Now I'm 44, so goodness knows if I went back over there, I'd be grandpa. But what we ran into is that you have a bunch of alpha males that are trying to do their job and they don't want to be messed with. All right, right.
Yeah.
We've all done the military thing. We wanted to get out for a reason, and then you have people that are coming in and trying to do like the op order and all the other stuff, and it's like, let me just go out there and do my job and leave me be.
Yeah.
So a lot of those guys ended up going where they could be of best value, and that's in the head shed. Like, you guys can plan the operations, you guys can say where we're going, but don't get into the vehicle with me because we don't really like you that much. I mean, it must have been like prison, right? And I mentioned this, it's like prison rules. The
Yeah.
first guy that comes up to you and wants to be your friend is because he doesn't have any other friends. Like, don't talk to him. Like, just go figure out who your clique is going to be.
I can only imagine Grandpa's reaction when your buddy threw the air conditioner into the dang pool there in Baghdad. And thanks to you guys, that pool, the diving board got shut down. So any of us that went over there at that time to, hopefully get in the pool and jump off the diving board, didn't get a chance to do that. So thanks to you guys for doing that. All right. But
Yeah,
uh,
we tried to ruin it for you guys. That's why. I mean, that's the other big difference between military guys and contractors, right? We had access to alcohol, and we didn't have
yeah.
General Order Number One. And God, we were just idiots. We just partied like we were in a fraternity instead of in a combat zone.
Yeah, reading through the book, you kind of talk about that. Basically, what the title of your book is. Obviously, you mentioned you're making a shit ton of money over there. The rules are a little bit lax as opposed to what the military is, and you're always talking about girls and you guys can drink and stuff like that. You mentioned though in your book that being a private military contractor is an addiction. Can you kind of describe why that is?
Yeah, I say it's. I mean, it's an addiction. It's intoxicating, but it's toxic, and it is
Yeah.
because you feel yourself. And I think all service member feel this when you go over on a deployment, whether it's 1 year, 9 months. The
Yeah.
Air Force, I don't know, those 3 to 6 months, maybe they don't feel it as much. I say that as an Air Force guy, but you you get to a point where that's your new normal. That's your home. When you start thinking about home, this is it. Yeah, mortars are coming down and you heard a car bomb, but you still feel like it's home. And then when you actually get home, there's that desire to get back because all your friends are over there. You know what they're doing, you know how much money they're making. You don't have that first and the 15th paycheck. So
Yeah.
it really is this thing where it just draws you back in. And as an example, there's some guys right now that are doing stuff in Gaza that have been doing it since I was there. That was 20 years ago, and they just keep going back.
And I would assume it's because the pay is pretty good.
Well, the pay is great. Don't get me wrong, but the pay has gone down exponentially since I started,
Yeah.
unless you get on specific contracts. And it really is that draw. Like, where are all your friends at? And we'll talk about it later. But when you get home and it's just you and your thoughts, as private contractors, I'm not saying woe is me, but as private contractors, we deal with PTSD and all those invisible scars of war. And when you come back and you have one buddy in Tennessee, the others in Florida, and everybody else is in Iraq, it's like, just send me back. It feels more comfortable.
That's one of the things there that's similar to those servicemen, especially maneuver, fire, and effects guys or special operations guys. you feel more comfortable, you feel safer in a combat zone surrounded by like-minded individuals wearing, kit and, with weapons everywhere and stuff like that. And you come home and you don't have that stuff anymore, and it's hard to deal with. Did Blackwater have any kind of programs that would help with PTSD or traumatic brain injury, anything like that post deployment? Did you have anything like that from Blackwater?
Yeah, they have a Facebook page where a bunch of old
Oh,
Blackwater guys get on there
yeah.
and they gripe about stuff. They did start a nonprofit. I don't know how successful it is to try to help some of those contractors, but the short answer is no, right? Like, at the end of the day, we kind of knew what we were joining up for. So we just got to figure it out on our own. But there's no medical, there's no dental, there's no mental health. You don't get to talk to the Blackwater shrink like you could at the VA. It
Yeah.
really is just kind of you when you get home.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break, Morgan, and when we come back, I want to dig into a little bit about Blackwater and operations in combat, and really get into the meat of this. But first, let's take a quick break and let's hear from our sponsors at Downrange Supplements.
Downrange Supplements. As the brand of the troops, we produce only the highest quality supplements conducive to mission effectiveness. Whether it's our fully dosed pre-workout, recovery and rehydration, or Mermite protein, it's time to continually improve your fighting position with Downrange Supplements. Go to www.downrangesups.com today and take your training to the next level.
Hey folks, welcome back. I'm SEAC retired John Wayne Troxell. My guest today is Morgan Lerette, Air Force veteran, multiple combat tours as a service member, but also as a private military contractor. He is the author of Guns, Girls, and Greed, His Life as a Blackwater Mercenary in Iraq. So Morgan, let's get back into this. Let's talk about your life in Blackwater. What would a typical mission look like? Especially, if I understand right, you were responsible for a lot of missions that were going after gathering evidence of war crimes or crimes in general against Saddam Hussein. Can you kind of talk about how that kind of went in terms of notification, how you got there, what were some of the things you did while you were there, and then how you continue to prepare for follow-on missions?
Yeah, so like I was mentioning earlier, it would change by the day. But with the Regime Crimes Liaison Team, we started in Baghdad, and it really was us ferrying these various organizations, we call them OGAs, other government agencies. So your CIA, NSA, DIA.
Yeah.
We would take them and we would drive them around. JSS Justice is where Saddam Hussein got hanged. So
Yep.
we would always go up there. We would drop off evidence up there. We take these guys to court. We drop off evidence. And it was really making sure that we had that chain of custody of evidence so that when it got to the trial, it wouldn't look like a kangaroo court,
Yeah.
which it did look like you were down in Australia once they got him on trial. But the cool thing was, and I don't know if it's cool, but a lot of the atrocities happened in northern Iraq. So Sulaymaniyah, which is right close to Halabja, which got gassed by Saddam Hussein and Chemical Ali in 1988.
Yeah.
After we went in 1993, we let Saddam Hussein retain his helicopters. And what he did is he sent all of his troops up there to the Kurdish region, which is north of Kirkuk. And he just started wiping out villages. So we would go up there, village to village. Well, first, we don't get to fly up there on anything nice. They didn't put us in a G5. They stuck us on a Black Hawk with all of our bags. And by the time you hit outside of Baghdad, my legs are asleep. I'm sitting there like in excruciating pain, but you can't show it because you don't want to be the wimp, right? You have to just sit there. So we fly all the way up there. They put us up in a hotel, and we're literally going to the most depressing places every day. So we'd go to one village, and what we noticed really quick was they didn't have any military age males. They didn't have anybody my age. What they had is they had young kids, and they had an older generation of males and a bunch of females. And that's because Saddam Hussein would go into each of these villages, grab anybody that was essentially my age, right? 1993, I would have been 13, round them all up, dig a hole, shoot them, put them in this hole, and then bury it over. So we went to a ton of just mass graves. Halabja was extremely sobering. You wouldn't get it by how I talk about it in the book because I joke about everything, but it was really where Saddam Hussein had decided that he was going to take out an entire population, the Kurds. So the Kurds were extremely happy to have us. But at the same time, going to all those places kind of it just takes a little bit of your soul every time you go to one of those spots and you see how savage people can be to each other.
How did the locals treat you all, when you got there?
They loved us in northern Iraq. They hated us in Baghdad
Yeah.
because we didn't have the same rules as the military, right? We didn't have to go with traffic. We could run cars off the road. I've heard specifically in Ramadi that they looked at the Blackwater guys as the terrorists, and the military guys were okay. And that goes directly back to just not having the same rules of engagement as a private military contractor that you do as a military member. When we first got there, we were going out to the election, so everybody's really happy. And there's these kids, and they're waving at us at like 8, 9 years old. And then 2 months later, driving kind of in the same route, this kid starts doing the whole shotgun thing, like he's shooting at us. And I was like, oh man, the war is turning. It's turning quick. Now, the northern Iraqis, they absolutely loved us. The Peshmerga is their military force. They loved us. We stayed at a hotel, finest hotel in Sulaymaniyah, which is, it might be a Holiday Inn in the United States, but it was still really, really nice for them. And we could walk around the local population. One of the funny stories is we had this little Asian guy, and me and my buddy were both 6'2", and we're walking around, and these two girls come up and they're like, can we take a picture? So we go over there and we're posing, and my little Asian buddy's in the middle, and they hand him the camera because they wanted to take pictures with the Americans, which is, us two tall white guys. So it was great up there. Those people, the Kurds are absolutely salt of the earth people.
You mentioned the Blackwater contractors that were killed in Fallujah, strung up on a bridge that ultimately led to the operations in Fallujah, Fallujah 1 and 2, where a lot of Marines and a lot of soldiers were killed. Can you kind of talk what happened there? And you mentioned in the book, I think anybody that served in Iraq and Afghanistan, whether you're military or PMC, knows that at a minimum 3-vehicle convoy. And as I understand, they were not in a 3-vehicle convoy. Can you talk through that?
It was a confederacy of dunces. It was a number of mistakes that were made at any given time. Supposedly, and I read the after action review for it. They had 2 vehicles that were getting ready to go from point A to point B. I don't remember what those are. They were told to go through Fallujah. Now, anybody that knew Fallujah knew that was literally the nexus of like the Sunni triangle. That's where all the terrorists were.
Yeah.
So these guys went through single vehicle. They didn't have any heavies. I think they had 249s, 240 Bravos in a vehicle. And at some point, they ended up getting rear-ended because they got stuck in traffic, and then they got ambushed, and then they got dragged through the streets.
Yeah.
Now, this is where that private military and military policy come together and they collide, because George W. Bush did not want to be known as the president that had people dragged through the streets that were burned up, right? He did not want Somalia 2.0.
Right.
The first thing he did was he said, okay, Marines, go take this. The Marines start going in, they're taking it. Then they created a ceasefire. And then in October 2004, we realized that, hey, they're just, building up more material, more men, more weapons.
Yeah.
So the Marines went in and took Fallujah in October, November 2004. And if you think about it, the proximate cause was that Blackwater ambush. And now you had Marines that went into harm's way and died. And maybe they would have gone in there anyway. Maybe they wouldn't have. I have no idea. But the catalyst was having civilians on a battlefield, and what happens to U.S. citizens and how do we react to it. And we'll talk about it later. But that's my biggest concern with PMCs now, is we just keep getting them closer and closer to the front lines.
Yeah. Were there any lessons learned that came to you from that incident that were, pretty relevant that you could use to make sure? I mean, obviously, like you said, there was just a series of stupid mistakes that were made there. But was there anything Blackwater writ large that came to you that said, hey, we got to change how we're doing business, or you got to get better, or whatever?
No, No,
Nothing.
nothing. No. I mean, it was pretty standard operating procedures. You have at least three vehicles, right? You have somebody in the back. They're going to have a 249 or a 240. Like that's why I say it was just a series of bad mistakes because
Yeah.
none of it makes sense in hindsight. A single vehicle, they didn't have armor.
Yeah.
As much as we wanted to put those scarves on and you could tell we're Americans. It's not that hard. There's not a whole lot of Chevy Suburbans rolling around that don't have Americans in them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it was really just trying to mitigate doing those silly things. In the safer places like northern Iraq, like we were talking about, we could do two vehicle convoys. That wasn't that big of a deal. But if you were down there where IEDs were starting to be all the rage in '04,
Yep.
'05, three vehicles, and usually what we did is we also had an escort vehicle, which was a Humvee up in front and then a Humvee in back. And then we had an ambulance, which was a Suburban full of medical gear. And we would
Yeah.
ferry convoys that way.
So I want to get back to the book here. You talk about principles, whether they are Department of Defense, Department of State, whoever your high value individual, that they need to get out in harm's way. What do you mean by that?
You can't do your job sitting at a desk.
Yeah.
And I remember before I deployed over there was a guy that worked for the State Department and he got orders to go to Iraq and he was on all the news channels saying, "You
Yeah.
assigned my death warrant. I'm going to die over there. And that's what you're doing." And I thought, man, what is going on with these guys? Like that
Yeah.
makes as a military member, it makes no sense to me. You just
Right.
go. So when they got over there, they started realizing after a while that it was pretty dangerous and they weren't going outside of the green zone very often. And John Negroponte, who was the ambassador to
Yeah.
Iraq, would never leave the green zone unless he was in a helicopter.
Yeah.
So what you had is all these people, these diplomatic missions to build Iraq back, right? Let me digress a little. There was when they got rid of Saddam Hussein's government, there was nobody that knew how to run a city or a state or
Right.
anything, right? They
Yeah.
couldn't do spreadsheets, they couldn't pick up garbage, they couldn't none of it. All that stuff was through the bath party.
Yeah.
So if you're going and you're trying to teach these people, hey, how do you set up a stock market? How do you land planes? How do you, get your minerals out? Ministry of Oil. You have to go out there and meet them where they are
Yeah.
instead of hoping that they're going to come into the green zone and meet you and retain that information and take it back.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. Like how many times have you heard is the officer walking his line, right?
Right. Right.
Exact same concept.
Yeah. One of the other things you talked about towards the end of your book, you talked about the blurred lines between government contracts and combat. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I mean, private military contractors are supposed to be defensive.
Yeah.
They're the gate guards. They're the guys that are out there protecting somebody. The problem is when we went into Iraq in 2004, or sorry, 2003, we didn't want to be seen as occupiers.
Right.
So what we did is we gave the government, we had, elections, and then we handed it off to the Iraqi people. That's when Brimmer left and the Blackwater guys came in under Department of State.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was really to make sure that it said we're not occupiers. They own their own country. They're allowed to do this. Now, when you have something like that on such a large scale and you don't have the personnel to support it, what do? Same thing Walmart does at Christmas. You go and you get contractors.
Yeah.
So what they did is they brought all these contractors in to protect these diplomats, even though they have a diplomatic security service. And then over the course of time, they had the ability to hire these people, to bring them in, to replace us, right, with Department of State personnel, and they never have. To this day, they never have. So they've made a conscious decision not to. And that's where you start getting to the point where are we actively engaging in combat operations when we're driving through Baghdad, right? That's more of an offensive operation than defense by far.
There is. Yeah.
And if you have to discharge your weapon or like the car bombs were all the rage, how close do you let a car get to your convoys? So it really started blurring those lines between,
Yeah.
civilians and military and combat roles. And it just keeps getting more and more blurry as we move forward.
Yeah. I even have a personal anecdote myself of private military contractors. In 2004, I was in northern Iraq, Mosul, and combat outpost just out there. And Two vehicle convoy was heading out of the wire. They weren't out there very long, and all of a sudden we heard a lot of gunfire. And they came back in when one of the guys strapped on the hood who had been wounded. Thankfully, he survived and everything. But it made me think, okay, who's their QRF? Who's their backup, and how important is this mission? Does it pass the threshold of the risk is too high and they're still doing it and everything? And who in hire would tell them, hey, no, you're not going to do that mission? As you described, it's the wild, wild west out there.
Well, it's like I was saying earlier about big boy rules. Now, big boy rules are kind of cool when it's just you, but when you need support and you don't have radio comms or you can't call Big Army and say, hey, by the way, we've been hit, that's where, that's where you get your cost savings by having military contractors over there instead of US military. But is it worth it? And I don't know the answer to that.
So Blackwater died, right? Can you kind of describe that? You call it the death of Blackwater.
It was the death of Blackwater. It was the death knell for sure. So Nisser Square 2007, I'm sure everybody's familiar with that, where the Blackwater guys ended up getting into an incident where they ended up shooting. Blackwater at that point ceased to exist because the Iraqi government said, we are not going to have Blackwater in our country, right? They own the country, so they're able to say you can or you can't have certain companies in there.
Yeah.
So what happened was Triple Canopy walked right through the gate of the man camp and said, hey, all you Blackwater guys, you now work for Triple Canopy. They gave him the old Pope's blessing. And it was all the exact same guys, all the same leadership. It was just under Triple Canopy instead of Blackwater. Now, Blackwater not being able to get contracts anymore, that's when they went through their 8 or 9, changes of name to Z to Academy. They had another one in there somewhere. But at that point, during the Obama administration, Eric Prince was, he was not going to get any more contracts. So he ended up selling Blackwater to Triple Canopy, which is now under Constellus, and it gets, just keeps going on and on. But that really was the death of Blackwater. But their logo lives on. You can get Blackwater ammo, and you can get the bear paw and weapons and stuff. So it's like a licensing agreement.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, we're going to take another quick break here and hear from our sponsors. When we come back, I want you to talk about what PMCs are doing today and where they're at, because they don't get a lot of attention right now. Maybe because we're not in a major conflict right now. But before we go into that, let's hear from our sponsor at PME Hard Consulting. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Leader Talk. I want to take a quick moment to talk about leadership. At PME Hard Consulting and Lead, we offer top-tier leadership development and coaching. With over 60 years of combined military and leadership experience to lean on, along with certifications in the Power of Positive Leadership, Power of Positive Teams, and the Energy Bus programs by best-selling author John Gordon, we offer training that will help you cultivate positive, impactful leadership within your organization. To learn more or to schedule your leadership workshop, head to www.pmehard.com and start building a better, more effective leadership team today. Hey folks, welcome back. I'm SEAC retired John Wayne Troxell. We're still here with Morgan Lerette, author of Guns, Girls, and Greed, former private military contractor, a veteran of the Air Force, and as I've learned here, an all-around good guy. Morgan, welcome back. We're talking about your time as a Blackwater private military contractor. You talked about the death of Blackwater, but what are private military contractors doing today? Where could we find them today, and what are they doing?
Yeah, just look under any rock is the truth. I thought private military contractors were going to dry up after Iraq and Afghanistan. The opposite has happened. They've gone corporate. So Constellus owns not only Triple Canopy, but intelligence apparatus. It's got a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Where you can find them is anywhere you want to look. Anywhere where the U.S. has a presence, there is a private military contractor, which goes back to the whole point that they've chosen to use PMCs instead of training their own people to do these protective details. So look, we're trainers in the Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
Everybody saw 13 hours. So Libya, anywhere where there's an intelligence apparatus, you're looking at Syria, the U.S.-Mexico border, this is the one that kind of got me, is private military contractors making literally billions of dollars moving migrant families and migrant children from the U.S.-Mexico border into the United States and then handing them off to HHS under the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So they're essentially a taxi service to help traffic minors. It's insane. I wouldn't do that one. I wouldn't do the Gaza one either, which is a heck of a segue.
Yeah. What are those guys doing in Gaza?
They're praying that they don't get blown up. That's the only. I was talking to my buddy, and he's like, "Dude, I wouldn't even take that." So there's no status of forces agreement, which means
Right.
there's no law, there's no regulation over these people. If something happens, they could be prosecuted by the Palestinians, they could be prosecuted by the Israelis, they could be prosecuted by anybody.
Yeah.
They don't have any QRF except for internal. The Israelis will not come to support them because what they're doing is they're checking vehicles that are going through a checkpoint to get into Gaza. I should have led with that. So if something bad happens, the IDF is not going to come rescue them because that would break the ceasefire that they're staying out of Gaza. So these guys are making $1,100 a day searching vehicles. And on its face, it just doesn't seem that crazy. But if you think about it, have we ever had a private military go into another country with a disputed border and be able to tell people, yes, you can or you can't come in here?
Yeah.
It's a huge step for private military contractors and what they're able to do. And the other thing I can't find is who's paying for it.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Who is funding this stuff? I mean, is it the
I
American taxpayer? Or?
I don't know. That is the big secret that nobody can figure out is who the heck is paying for this. Now, I think it's it's either the Israelis or it's the American taxpayer, but I can't find any information. And we're complaining about these pop-up nonprofits that were getting all this money sent to it. That's the
Yeah.
same thing that PMC did. It's called UG Solutions. It didn't
Yeah.
exist for until 6 months before this came out, and it won the contract.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, it's just slimy the way private military contractors are being used. But I'll tell you why they're being used. One, if a PMC gets hurt, it makes a news cycle for 2 to 3 days. If a
Yeah.
U.S. soldier gets hurt, it makes a news cycle for weeks. And then two, it allows politicians to distance themselves from their policy. We talked about Nisser Square. We talked
Mhm.
about Fallujah. Nobody says, oh, that DOD contractor or the Department of Defense people got hanged off a bridge or were in Nisser Square. They say that was Blackwater. And
Yeah.
that is really good cover for any politician that wants to say, oh, we paid for this, but we didn't think they were going to do such horrible things or horrible things were going to happen.
Yeah. Now, these guys on the southern border, are they going into Mexico or are they just picking these? Where are they picking these folks up at and bringing them in?
Yeah, so I was on that Blackwater Facebook page that I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier when I released the book, and they were talking about company. The company's called MVM, Mike Victor Mike, and what they're doing is they're stationed down at the border, like at Eagle Pass.
Yeah.
When Border Patrol gets an unaccompanied minor, they only have 72 hours to process them. This goes back to the kids in cages thing, right? They don't
Yeah.
want to have kids
Yeah.
in cages. So within 72 hours, they hand them off to a private military contractor who takes them to wherever they're asking to go. So if you've been on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, and you
Yeah.
see those guys that are walking through the airport with migrants,
Yeah.
and it's a charter flight, and they say, "Who are you with?" and they flip their badge over real quick so you can't tell. That's the private military contractors that are essentially moving these kids to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, who
Yeah.
then is supposed to sit there and say, where are these kids supposed to go? Where's their aunt or uncle?
Yeah.
Now, think of that supply chain. And as a smuggler, what they're doing is they're dropping these kids off at the border and they're saying, when you get to Kentucky, make sure that you reach out to this person. That's your sponsor. They then spit them out on the other end directly to the smugglers in that unit. And that's when you start hearing about child sex trafficking, getting into gangs, the drugs, you name it.
Yeah.
So we've really created a supply chain that allows for this. And I'm glad it's ending. You're starting to see it end because the spigot is being turned off,
Yep.
but still like that's a black eye on America for the last 4 years.
You've talked a lot about, the trials and tribulations of being a private military contractor. What advice would you give to a young person that might see, oh shoot, $1,100 a day to go to Gaza? Man, what advice would you give to somebody that is thinking about being a PMC?
Yeah, I've written a manual of what not to do with my book, Guns, Girls, and Greed. So if you
Okay.
read it, do the opposite.
Yeah.
So the first thing you need to do is set a goal, right? If you set a goal and you say, hey, I want to have a couple $100,000 or pay off my house or I'm paying for college, whatever that is, once you reach that goal, you can decide if you want to still be a contractor, and you don't have to be a contractor.
Yeah.
Now, me, I didn't set any of those goals. I spent the money as fast as I could get it. So when it came time for that next contract, it was like, yeah, I have to take this. You don't want to be in the have to take this boat. The second thing is everything you own should be pink, because when you go overseas, everybody steals stuff. You should have
Yeah.
pink water bottles, pink towels, you name it. Like that is probably some of the best advice. Is yeah, nobody's gonna talk crap about you. They will, but at the end of the day, you have a towel and theirs got stolen by the local.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it it is, if you don't set that goal, it is something like I talked about earlier. It is toxic and it is intoxicating. You're just gonna keep going back to get that money, and if you just save $200,000 over the course of a year, 2 years, you can pretty much write your ticket at that point. Don't and
Yeah.
pay your taxes. Oh my
Yes.
God, everybody thought, oh, we're like the military, it's tax free. You are not. You are
Yeah.
not tax free. Pay your taxes.
Yeah. What do you hope the reader gets out of your book? You kind of write about this at the end, and you said, hey, if you're still reading here at this point, hey, thanks for doing it. But what do you hope they get out of this?
Yeah, I mean, I hope the military members that read it look at it and they realize that their battle space is never going to be the same. You
Sure.
are always going to have civilian contractors. When I went over as an Army officer, we would have private contractors come on our base, had no idea where they came from, what they were doing. They came in to get some food real quick and then they left.
Yeah.
You are always going to have these people in your battle space going forward. The other thing is that I hope people look at contractors and say, yeah, I understand why they were there. Did they add value or not? And is this something that we should promote as a government, to use these people instead of using people that, have rules of engagement, have regulations, have a really solid chain of command? And I don't know what the answer is. I wish I did. I do hope that the private military contracting career field takes a nosedive and those contracts start drying up, because we've really gotten to a point where we depend on them instead of using them for support functions.
Well, Morgan, we always close out our episode with our warrior shout out. You've had a lot of combat experience, both in uniform and out as a PMC. I'm going to allow you to give a warrior shout out here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I met my wife in the Army, so she's got it. She's got to get the first one. I mean,
There you
she's
go.
amazing.
Yeah.
And she's dealt with me for this long, so she gets that one. But my buddy, his name is Jay Murphy. When I got into the officer corps, he kind of looked me in the face and said, "What are you going to do when you get out?" And I had no idea. And he went to he went to Notre Dame and Columbia University, and he was like, "Dude, you can go to these schools, you can do this thing." And it, as a poor kid growing up, none of that even occurred to me. So having the right people in your life at the right time to give you the advice and actually listen to it, I mean, you should try to do that.
Yeah.
Really set me on a completely different path. And that was my buddy Jay, Captain Jonathan Murphy.
All right, Captain Murphy, we salute you. So, how can our viewers find you on social media, and how can they order your book?
Yeah, so track me down on Instagram. I'm on X. I'm on TikTok if you want the Chinese to steal all your data. And it's just at Blackwater Dude and the number one, at Blackwater Dude 1. People are like, "Why'd you use that?" I was like, "Because I say dude all the time in the book. Like that's how I do it."
Yeah.
And then if you want the book, we got the audio. Jay Moore, the comedian Jay Moore, actually read the audio, did a spectacular job.
Awesome.
But butchered some of the names, kept saying Ramadi instead of Ramadi, but we're gonna let it slide.
Yeah.
But on Amazon, check it out on Amazon, Audible. You can get it wherever books are sold.
Awesome. Well, Morgan, thanks so much. This has been a great conversation, brother. I have the utmost respect for what you've done in your career, but most importantly, that you left the military, having served in combat. You became a private military contractor at Blackwater, and then you describe it. I felt like I was riding in some of these vehicles with you when I read your book, brother. So great job on that. Thanks again for what you do. God bless you, and God bless your family. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
All right. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Leader Talk. If you like what you see, subscribe to us on YouTube or Spotify. If you like what you're hearing here, continue to tune in. We're going to have more interesting guests like Morgan as we come on. And if you want a copy of my book, Surrender or Die, Reflections of a Combat Leader, you can go all the places that books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or you can go to my website, pmehard.com. Thanks to our sponsors, Downrange Supplements and PME Hard Consulting. And to all of you out there, God bless you all and God bless America. We'll see you again next time on Leader Talk. Boom.